Okay, I want to talk about some stuff from chapter 5. I'm going to talk, this is on page 159. I want to say something about rhetorical analogies and comparisons. Uh, a lot of arguments are based upon comparing things. A is like B, and then you can draw your conclusions from that. You have to be very careful with comparisons. Let's take rhetorical analogies, for example. Your book mentions that Social Security is often being compared to a Ponzi scheme, and basically a Ponzi scheme is it's in economics, it's a way, it refers to a scheme where people get ripped off. Basically, it's a pyramid scheme. I'm not going to get into it, but basically, if you call something a Ponzi scheme, it's a ripoff. You're gonna lose your money. It's a pyramid scheme where the people at the top make all the money, everybody at the bottom loses. To compare Social Security to a Ponzi scheme is basically saying it's financially unsustainable. And if you do that, if you just, it's a way of winning an argument. It's a way of getting somebody to vote against Social Security. The problem with that is that you need evidence. I mean, if you're going to argue that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme, you're going to need to actually present the evidence, explain why in detail. By just calling it a Ponzi scheme, it's rhetorically effective. I mean, it can get a lot of people angry at at Social Security and and make them want to reject it, but it's not a good argument. Now, so you have to be very careful with comparisons. Um, so that's a rhetorical analogy. What I want to go over is what your book mentions: four things to look at when you're comparing different things. Following are some questions that you would, this on page 160, following are some questions that you would be wise to keep in mind when considering comparisons. So this is very important because a lot of arguments are based upon comparisons. So it's nice to know about some basic things to look for. The book points out four. Following are some questions that you would be wise to keep in mind when considering comparisons. They include reference to omissions and distortions, which can be among the more subtle forms of rhetorical devices. Okay, so the first one is when two things are being compared, you should ask yourself whether something is being left out, whether the comparison is leaving out important information. That's the first one. Is important information missing? Here's an example. It is nice to hear that the employment rate has gone down. Okay, so you say the employment rate has gone down compared to a previous situation, right? So that's a comparison. But it's not nice to hear that if you learn that the reason is that a larger percent of the workforce has given up looking for a job. So yeah, okay, you say, wow, the economy is pretty good. The unemployment rate has gone down. Well, that seems good on the surface, but not if you then learn that important information has been left out. Not if you learn that the reason it's gone down is because a lot of people have just given up looking for work. They're not going down to the unemployment office, so they're not being counted as out of work. Okay, so when important information is missing, the comparison is no good. Here's another example. Suppose someone says that 90% of heroin addicts once smoked marijuana. Okay? Now, okay, that might indicate that smoking marijuana is very dangerous. But some important information has been left out. Without other information, the comparison is meaningless, since 90% of heroin addicts also listen to the Beatles. 90% of heroin addicts also, you could say, exercise or jog. Okay, so when you leave important information out, the comparison breaks down. And that's what you need to look for. I think Chomsky's the document on Chomsky on manufacturing consent, uh, sorry about that. Chomsky's document the documentary on Chomsky Manufacturing consent brings up because a lot of times when you read about say U.S. foreign policy, how the United States is supporting democracy all over the world and so on, and we're better than other nations. That's nice, but if important information is left out, I mean, if you're leaving all the information out about how the United States actually suppresses democracy in other parts of the world, the comparison is meaningless. Another thing you should look for is the same standard being applied. So if you're going to compare A and B, the same standard has to be applied. Let's say you have two people. Here's an example. Let's say you have two students. They both took a course in algebra. And one person got an A and one got a B, right? So you might say, well, the person who got an A is better in algebra than the person who got the B. But what if you learn that the person who got the A was in a class where 80% and above was an A, and the person who got the B was in a class where 90% and above got the A. So the person who got the B in one class, say the person got 84%, and got a B, and the other class where you get an A if it's above 80%, let's say the person got 81%. So the one person who got 81% got the A, and the other person who got 84% got the B. So there's different standards being applied. So whenever a comparison is made, this person is better than this person or whatever, I mean, you have to ask yourself what standard is being used to judge something. So is the same standard being used? Here, your book gives an example where, well, about the jobless rate again. Are the same reporting and recording practices being used? A change in the jobless rate doesn't mean much if the government changes the way it calculates joblessness, as sometimes happens. And then it also gives another example. In 1993, the number of people in the United States with AIDS suddenly increased dramatically. Had a new form of AIDS virus appeared? No, the federal government had expanded the definition of AIDS to include several new indicator conditions. As a result, overnight, 50,000 more people were considered to have AIDS. Okay, the problem there is that a different standard is being used. Another question you have to ask yourself if you're comparing different things is, are the items comparable? Let's say, for example, this is an exaggeration, but it makes the point. Let's say you have two runners, and one person ran a mile in 5 minutes. That's pretty fast, 5-minute mile. And another person ran the mile in 8 minutes. Okay, so it looks like, wow, the person who ran the mile in 5 minutes must be a much better runner than the person who ran it in 8 minutes. But are the items comparable? Let's say the person who ran the mile in 8 minutes was actually running in mud, and it was raining outside. The other person who ran the mile in 5 minutes was running on a nice, beautiful day, and the wind actually was, let's say the wind was actually with him or her, so they're being propelled by the wind. One person's running with the wind pushing them, the other person's running in mud and it's raining. These are not comparable at all. So the comparison doesn't really tell you anything. So there's three things to ask yourself when you're dealing with comparisons. Is important information missing? In fact, that's probably one of the most serious things things you need to look for in critical thinking when you think about anything. What is being left out? Is the same standard being used? Are the items comparable? And also, when comparisons are put in the terms of average, the word average doesn't tell you anything. The average income, the average temperature. You hear this word a lot, and really it doesn't mean anything until you ask yourself what is meant by average. Because average can mean mode, it can mean mean, and it could mean median. Let's say here's an example. Let's say you have let's say you have a company. Here's what the salary is. Two people make $10,000 $10,000 a year. One person makes 50,000. One person makes $1 million. And one person makes 10 million. So here's a company, 5 people in the company. 2 people make 10,000 a year. One person makes 50,000. One person $1 million. One person 10 million. Now, if you didn't know anything about these salaries, and somebody said, and you're thinking about working for that company, and you say, well, what's the average income for that company? Well, the person you might be told, it's a great company to work for. The average income is like $2 million. It's more than 2 million per year. And that's true. The average income is more than $2 million a year. If you mean average as mean, meaning the arithmetical average, where you take all the salaries and divide by, there's 5 people, you add all the salaries up, you get over $10 million. You get over $10 million over that 10 million. 10 million divided by 5 is $2 million. They're making over $2 million. That is a great company to work for, where the average salary is $2 million. On the other hand, somebody might say it's a terrible company to work for, because the average salary it is $10,000. That's kind of strange. The average salary is $2 million, and then the average salary is $10,000, and they're both true. The average salary of this company is $10,000. If you mean average as mode is the value that appears most. 2 people make $10,000. Only one person makes the rest. One person makes 50,000, one $1 million, one 10 million. The one that appears most is 10,000. So the average salary of this company basically is poverty wages, $10,000. Well, that's a terrible company to work for. On the other hand, you could say the average salary for this company is $50,000, because that's as when you're taking average to mean median. The one right in the middle. There's 2 below and 2 above. So the point is this: when you hear when you hear the word average, and in a previous chapter we learned about ambiguity. What an ambiguous word is a word. Something is semantically ambiguous when it can mean 2 or more things. I'll meet you at the bank. What are you talking about? The Bank of America or the Bank of the River? That's one example I gave. In this case here, the word average is ambiguous because it can only mean 2 things. It can mean 3 things. It can mean median. It can mean mode, which means the one that appears most, 10,000. It could be mean, the one right in the middle, 2 above, 2 below, or it can mean median, the average, the arithmetical average, where you take all the values and divide by the number of values. The word average is ambiguous. So that's one of the things do not forget from after this course in critical thinking. There are certain things, there's a lot of things in critical thinking that you just don't forget. This is definitely one of them. So whenever you hear one of your friends or anybody else, or you listen to a news broadcast and they use the word average, just stop. If you're with some friends, say, look, that doesn't mean anything. And they'll say, what are you talking about? And you say, yeah, and then explain. It's totally ambiguous. Until you identify exactly what you mean by average, the word average really tells you nothing. And anybody could use it any way they want to manipulate you. Anyway, that's from chapter 5 on comparisons. Very important pages.